In the gallery of 20th-century tyrants, names like Stalin, Hitler, and Pol Pot are infamous. But what about the man who declared himself president for life, the unique miracle, and banned the word intellectual? Francisco Macías Nguema turned Equatorial Guinea into a living nightmare, a nation so terrorized it was dubbed the Auschwitz of Africa. Yet his story is often overlooked. We tend to think of dictators as singular forces of evil, but the truth is often more complex. Macías didn't rise in a vacuum. His reign of terror was made possible by a perfect storm of colonial neglect, Cold War paranoia, and regional power plays. To understand this forgotten dictator, we have to look at the forces that created him, starting with the one that ruled his country for nearly 200 years: Spain. For Spain, this small territory, a mainland region called Rio Muni and the island of Bioko, was an afterthought. Madrid was far more interested in its grander colonial projects in Latin America and North Africa. As a result, Equatorial Guinea was left to stagnate. Spain invested almost nothing in building a functional society. When independence arrived in 1968, the country had barely any university graduates. There were no trained lawyers, few doctors, and a tiny, inexperienced civil service. Think about that, a nation born with no one equipped to run it. This wasn't just an oversight. It was a recipe for disaster. It created a massive power vacuum, and nature, as we know, abhors a vacuum. Someone was bound to fill it, and that someone was waiting in the wings. This lack of institutions was made worse by Spain's classic colonial strategy: divide and rule. The Spanish administrators deliberately fostered ethnic tensions to maintain control. On the island of Bioko, they favored the native Bubi people. On the mainland, they cultivated a small, compliant elite from the majority Fang ethnic group. This created deep-seated mistrust between different communities. Instead of fostering a unified national identity, Spanish policy ensured that when independence came, the primary loyalties were to tribe and clan, not to the new nation. This toxic environment was the perfect breeding ground for a demagogue like Francisco Macías Nguema. He masterfully exploited these divisions, presenting himself as the champion of the oppressed Fang majority against the supposedly privileged Bubi and the Spanish-backed elites. He painted his political rivals not as opponents with different ideas, but as ethnic enemies and traitors collaborating with the former colonial masters. By the mid-1960s, international pressure from the United Nations and the winds of change blowing across Africa forced Spain's hand. It was time to decolonize, but Madrid wanted to do it on its own terms. They'd planned a managed transition, hoping to install a friendly, pliable leader who would protect Spanish economic interests, particularly its wealthy cocoa and coffee plantations. Spain organized a constitutional conference and an election, confident they could control the outcome. They looked at the field of aspiring leaders and made a fatal miscalculation. They saw Francisco Macías Nguema, a former colonial civil servant with a reputation for being quiet and unremarkable, and pegged him as a weak, easily manipulated figure. They threw their support behind more moderate, pro-Spanish candidates, believing one of them would surely win. But they completely underestimated Macías' cunning and his ability to tap into the deep well of anti-colonial resentment. Macías played a brilliant double game. To the Spanish, he presented himself as a reasonable nationalist who understood the need for continued cooperation. He was reassuring, careful not to seem too radical. But to the people of Equatorial Guinea, especially the Fang majority, he sang a very different tune. He was the fiery anti-colonial crusader, the man who would finally cast off the shackles of Spanish oppression and restore dignity to the African. His populist message, combined with the fractured political landscape, resonated powerfully. In the 1968 presidential election, to Spain's shock and horror, Macías Nguema won. He was now president. The man they had dismissed as a pawn was now in charge of the entire chessboard. And he was about to flip the table over. The moment he took office, the mask came off. The man who had reassured Spain of his friendship immediately began a systematic campaign to dismantle every trace of Spanish influence. He railed against neocolonialism and instigated a wave of anti-white sentiment. Tensions boiled over in 1969 when he accused Spain of plotting a coup. This manufactured crisis gave him the pretext he needed. He declared a state of emergency, giving himself sweeping powers. In the ensuing panic, thousands of Spaniards, from plantation owners to civil servants, fled the country. This mass exodus had two immediate effects. First, it crippled the nation's already fragile economy. Second, and more importantly for Macias, it removed the last remaining check on his power. With the Spanish gone, and with no strong internal institutions to challenge him, the path was clear. He began arresting, torturing, and executing his political opponents, real and imagined. The power vacuum Spain had so carelessly created was now filled completely by one man as absolute and brutal authority. But Spain wasn't the only foreign power with a hand in this tragedy. As Macias consolidated his bloody rule, the world was deep in the throes of the Cold War, and the superpowers were about to make their own fateful decisions about Equatorial Guinea. We'll explore that next.